She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Cockacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cockacrow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Cockacrow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. Inaga, jackass yard for fetchy load. Oakley Cheyenne, bag over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover. From the farm, them a come. So now go down but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water.
Some washing clothes, some folks are bathed in. Reminds me of my day, a little washing clothes and bathing in the water. Good night to all of you. Good night to President Granger. Did you jump in a trench and do a little swimming as a little boy?
Well, I would say no, not quite. Bartica has a different geography to the quarantine. Quarantine has a different geography. Although I am proud of living in 3 counties, Essequibo, Demerara, and Berbice, I never had that same experience. But I did spend some time in the country, and I did get into the trench, and I did, try to catch one small fish. And I did live a little bit at Leguan. So you going around the 3 counties of Guyana at that time, you got different experiences. But I would say that my stay in the country was not as long as some people who were born and bred there. But I had a good balance of bringing in the 3 counties.
Absolutely. Good night to all of you who have now joined us, and thank those of you who have already shared the link, and we're thanking those of you who have intention to share the link as well, wherever you are, wherever that is, whether inside or outside of Guyana. Good night and welcome to another program of Anansi Web Education. With me is President David Granger, no stranger, the man who did all guys during the course of the coalition government. Lots and lots of good things indeed. But right now we'll go into the trenches, the political trenches, that is, and we'll deal with the historic general and regional elections, which were held on the 2nd of March 2020, resulted in a Partnership for National Unity's APNU loss of office, and the People's Progressive Party returned to office. Anansi Web Education, we will examine the Holodomor effect, example, the challenges, crisis, and controversy instigated by the People's Progressive Party, which caused the delay in the declaration of results by the Elections Commission. Anansi Web Education, we will address the following questions. But before we get to the questions, let me just remind you guys that the challenges, the crisis, and controversy instigated by the PPP, which caused the delay in the declaration of the results. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what the PPP did. So let's get to the first question. President Granger, how prepared was APNU AFC for the general and regional elections 2020? Now, those of you who are watching right now, this is important. How prepared, President Granger, was APNU AFC for the general and regional elections in 2020?
That is a very difficult question to answer. One, we were well prepared because I would say that after the no confidence motion in 2018, by February 2019, that is about 2 months after, I actually launched the 2020 GRE campaign. That is, we had a full year before the elections were actually held in March 2020. So theoretically, we were well prepared. On the other hand, there were some issues which indicated that some of our partners had not used that period in office to build strong constituencies and to conduct rigorous campaigning. So when you're dealing with half a dozen parties, there were 5 in APNU plus the AFC, you have to bear in mind that the whole notion of going to the National Assembly is based on representation, not based on the list. Each person who gets into the National Assembly represents between 5,000 to 7,000 votes. So in terms of preparation, each potential member of parliament, each candidate must be connected with a constituency. And if we had every MP bringing in 7,000 votes, well, we would have been able to win the election easy. But if MP candidates or if parties didn't ensure that they had that strength of support within the constituency, then of course you can say we were unprepared. How prepared were we? Yes, we knew what we should do. But did the parties pull their weight? Did the parties go out and win those constituencies? Did the parties communicate with the public? Did the parties campaign rigorously countrywide? They must answer for themselves. As leader of the PNC, we did. Everyone will know that I personally participated in 18 rallies countrywide. My wife was the key speaker at the first serious women's political campaign rally in the country. And you can see what we did countrywide. Certainly, many of the parties in APNU did campaign, but in fact, some of them did not pull their weight. Some of them were never seen in the hustings. Some of them were never seen in public. Some of them were only seen sitting on the sofa. It was not a sofa campaign. Campaigning is hard work. Campaigning means going to the 4 corners of the country, going to Oriala and going to Parima and going to Awariwanao and going to Mabaruma and going all around the country. You can't campaign from a Barbies chair. You can't campaign by press conferences. And this is what people have to learn if they want a seat in the National Assembly. They have to go out there and work for it. It's not an entitlement. It's something that has to be earned. So your question can be answered, yes, the preparations were made, the campaign superstructure was created, the architecture was there, but it then called upon potential candidates to actually hit the ground and meet the constituents and convince them that we deserved work for that second term. And you can't do that from a Barbies chair. You can't do that to the press conference. You have to go out there.
You cannot do that from a Barbies chair. You cannot do that from a press conference.
I'm not arguing against Barbicians, of course. I'm just using it as an example of being laid back. I know there's some Barbicians listening.
Yeah, not from exactly. Just don't be laid back in a Barbies chair. And that's what people do with a Barbies chair. Throw back and relax and read a newspaper. But now people hardly read newspapers. They just browse the internet, see what's happening on Facebook and so forth. Thank you, though. But, politicians and those out there, you got to work. You got to hit the streets. You got to hit the ground. You got to go in those villages, those communities. You got to work. It's not done by just a quick Facebook something or a quick press conference, or it doesn't work like that, guys. Anyways, second question. Who was responsible for authorizing the CARICOM recount of the ballots? Because right after the elections, and of course, everyone knew that with valid votes and so forth, the coalition, your government, won the election. That's my opinion and the perception of many folks out there. But the question, President Granger, is who was responsible for authorizing the CARICOM recount of the ballots after the elections, of course?
That is a simple question to answer because the entire electoral process is in the hands of the Election Commission. And only the Election Commission could authorize the recount. So the answer is simply the Election Commission authorized that recount. No political party could authorize the recount. The executive government couldn't authorize it. The National Assembly couldn't authorize it. Only the Election Commission. And only the Election Commission did authorize the account. Whether I agreed with the recount or not is not material. But the Election Commission ran the elections and it authorized the recount of the ballots. In any event, I was confident that APNU had run a clean campaign and that we did not get involved in any skullduggery, any manipulation of the ballots, any malpractices. So we had nothing to fear. And in fact, the recount was able to expose all of the abuses and irregularities that took place. And I don't think anybody could have said beforehand what those abuses were. The ballots were being cast in the names of persons who were dead or who had migrated. Ballots were being cast by persons without proper identification. Ballots were being cast at polling stations which exceeded the number of persons on the list. Ballots were being cast in one electoral district for, were being cast relevant to another electoral district. Ballots were being cast at one polling station containing documents from another polling station. There were problems, and even the CARICOM recount annotated those problems. It is for the Election Commission to decide whether those problems were serious enough to nullify the elections. And this is a moot question because 3 young women were able to bring cases to the courts, Ulita Moore, Misenga Jones, and Esmond David. And a critical approach was made by Esmond David, who said that in support of the ruling by the Court of Appeal of Guyana, that only valid votes should be counted. It was the CCJ which overturned that. But up to now, people are baffled. How could you say that votes which are not valid should be counted? If they're invalid, they're invalid. That's what it means. And I think the decisions of the court are quite baffling. Of course, we're required to accept the decisions. You don't, go and invade the courts. But the response to the challenges by those 3 women should not be ignored. Misenga Jones, Ulita Moore, and Esmond David. But a critical one was the decision of Esmond David to go before the courts. And the CCJ, it was the CCJ which overturned the ruling of the Appeal Court of Ghana. Only valid votes are to be counted. In this regard, we must bear in mind that the Chief Election Officer, who alone is responsible for going on the ground and producing the reports, the judge can't produce those reports. The courts can't produce the reports. It was the CEO who was empowered to produce those reports. He produced 4 reports. And the commission in the end decided which report would be used. And that was the report that was used on the 2nd of August to declare the president, Dr. Ali, Dr. Muhammad Ali, as the president. But there was only one declaration. In all that 153 days, there was only one declaration and only one authority under the Constitution. So you can see a process by which the authority shifted from the Election Commission literally 72 hours after the poll on the 5th of March And it didn't return to the Election Commission until the 2nd of August. In the meantime, the decision of the electorate, the verdict was in the hands of the courts, who never went on the ground and who did not, verify. They were not part of the recount. They did not verify that the poll was free and fair. And that was the anomaly. That was the anomaly of the entire process. But the question of validity cannot be avoided. That is to say, the chief election officer acted correctly in deciding that only valid votes would be counted. And this was the decision of the Court of Appeal of Guyana. And I cannot see that there could be any serious argument about that. Validity was determined by the CEO, and a report was produced to that effect. And I can't understand how you could have an election without determining the validity of votes, especially when you look at all of the anomalies which arose. Bear in mind, those anomalies were only identified because of the recount. There are people who were opposed to the recount, but after the recount, I would say that the chief election officer had the evidence to produce a report, which he did on the 11th of July, the third report. By the third report, you can see that he knew what had taken place better than he did after the first report. So the whole process, this Holodair effect, is very complex, and it does not show the courts in good light, because in a way you can say the courts perform some functions which should properly be performed by the commission.
All right, let's move to the third question. And this is very important. A lot of people felt that you as president, maybe knowing that there it is, an election concluded with thousands of invalid votes, thousands upon thousands of invalid votes, and questionable conducts and acts at the polling stations after the elections, of course, before and after the elections, the storming of the Guyana Elections Commission's office, and all manner of things. And then this question is important, President Granger. Why did APNU AFC acknowledge the results of the general and regional elections of 2020?
Well, I'm glad you used the word acknowledge, because that was the only constitutional avenue open to the APNU once the declaration was made. Some people, particularly some foreign observers, were using the word concede. That word doesn't appear in the Constitution of Guyana. There are some jurisdictions in which, a person who thinks he has lost would concede. The Constitution doesn't require anybody to concede. What happened in Guyana is that the APNU, and at that time I was leader of the APNU, I was required by the Constitution to announce to acknowledge the declaration, and that is exactly what I did. There was no constitutional option, but I acknowledged that the declaration had been made. I did not ever use the word accept, because I had in mind, and I made a broadcast to that effect. Unfortunately, there's some people who were not aware of the broadcast I made in all of the media, that there was no other way out of the process. That once the chairman of the election, and this is what I said from the 2nd of March, the chairman of the Election Commission could make a declaration. She only made one declaration, and constitutionally, I acknowledged that that declaration had been made, and that is other processes were put in motion. That is, once that declaration was made, the Chancellor of Judiciary would be informed, and the Chancellor of Judiciary would swear in the new president. So I was never invited to be sworn in.
You know that if to interject, that would have been my next question, because there are folks, and there are some folks who have that perception out there that you, as president, then you refuse to be sworn in for a second term as president again.
But that's stupid. That was stupid. At that time, everyone knew that I was suffering from cancer and I was undergoing treatment. And I came out of hospital, and I campaigned. There were about 18 campaigns countrywide in every region. I campaigned in every region, and people could look to see my energy and my enthusiasm and the effort I made in those campaigns. You mean after I've gone through all that, from January we launched in Georgetown, right through the process up to March, at breakneck speed. And you feel that after I've gone through that, having served for 5 years as president, I would refuse to be sworn in? Only one person in the entire world could make a declaration on the 2020 election. That person was the chairman of the Election Commission. And there was no declaration prior to the only declaration was made on the 2nd of August. There's no declaration. I was never invited. There was no and I said, once the declaration is made, I will obey that declaration. And that is very clear. So I think it's quite stupid for people to perpetuate this myth, this legend that I refused to be sworn in. I was never invited to be sworn in. And you only could, if you look at all the photographs, the Chancellor of the Judiciary swears in the president. Not my parish priest, not a neighborhood pastor, the Chancellor of Judiciary. And she has to get an instrument from the chairman of the commission. So the process is quite clear. I can't imagine how that legend has survived 4 years, that people would say that I was actually invited and refused. It's just counterintuitive. It's just stupid. And the truth is that I was never asked. I was never invited. And if I was invited, I would have accepted. No doubt about that. But I was never invited. I campaigned to be accepted, but I was never invited. One declaration was made on the 2nd of August, 2020, and that is the declaration we're living by. Of course, we went to the courts after that, but that's another matter, election petition. That is what the PPP should have done on the 5th of March. Put their complaints in the form of a petition. But the court decided to hear the petition, to grant an injunction. That is what caused the delay. That is the Holiday effect. The injunction granted by the court. But
lots and lots of injunctions indeed.
Yeah.
The
process.
go ahead.
No, I was saying that the process involved some very serious challenges to the electoral system, and people should not dismiss them as being the work of disaffected voters or an attempt to prolong the crisis. The prolongation, such as it was justified because it showed that there were ways of removing the responsibility for the outcome of the elections from the Election Commission and putting it in the hands of courts. And I think that was a travesty. That the courts had no business running elections. Otherwise, you might as well scrap the Constitution and tell the courts to run the election, decide where the polling places were, issue ballot papers. Election Commission has duties, and those duties were sidelined. And particularly the duties of the CEO expressed in those reports, particularly his third report of the 11th of July. It was not too late, but if those reports were accepted, the outcome would have been different. But the outcome,
I have before we,
based on validity and credibility.
it would have been different indeed. I have a quick before we go to the final question of tonight, and let's welcome all those who are watching from wherever. Good night. Because I've heard of this sort of talk out there that as president, you had the power to stop the elections. Did that ever cross your mind?
It's that happens in different jurisdictions. But as far as I'm concerned, that would have been constitutionally offensive. The process had been properly started on the 2nd of March, and I did not have such power. Once the votes were cast, once on the 2nd of March, the process was in the hands of the Election Commission. And any action against the Election Commission would have been illegal. It would have been illegal. I think there would have been blood on the streets. There was no justification after the 2nd of March for any person or government to seize control by reversing the outcome. And let us bear in mind that after the no confidence motion, there were several approaches to the courts, not the ones that I mentioned with these three courageous women, Esmond Davis, Masenga Jones, and Ulita Moore. But there were other things going on in the international community. And the donor countries had actually turned off the taps in 2019. In fact, the APNU AFC government was running on empty, as you say, with drivers who run out of gasoline. We were really running on empty because of the no confidence motion. And we were told in clear language that the taps have been turned off. This is not a hint or suggestion. And we were warned, all my cabinet ministers were warned of the consequences of not fulfilling our constitutional requirements, constitutional obligations, by having elections when they were due. And another error that people make is to think that I was in control of the process. I had meetings and documents were shown that I had meetings with the leader of the opposition. I had meetings with the chairman of the Election Commission. I had meetings with overseas observers. And it was not until September the 19th that the chairman of the Election Commission sent me a letter stating that elections could not be held before the end of February. And we held elections on the first available day after the end of February. That is, except for the Mashamani celebration, we had elections on Monday, the 2nd of March. So all these things were known. The PVP put up a very rowdy demonstration outside of the Pegasus Hotel, where I had to give a lecture. Ministers' cars were shaken. People who later on became ministers barged into while I was delivering a talk at Pegasus Hotel. Very rowdy, very vulgar, very noisy.
If you can stick a pin for a moment, if you can stick a pin for a moment, please, President Granger, as we remind folks of the storming there, the illegal act, the criminality by those very people.
Lock the door! Hey, you guys stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
Some people are of the view that those folks should have been arrested and charged, probably whatever charges are. But, Yep, that's the evidence. What they did, they stormed the GCOM's headquarters. Continue, sir.
But
Sorry.
that was in March. What I'm saying is the vulgarity started before that. The vulgarity was the violence was evident in West Babis on the 6th of March when they stormed the school buses. And the violence was, yes, look at the big cup there. Look at the flags. That's not an APNU sign. And outside the Pegasus Hotel, when I was speaking inside the Pegasus Hotel, you can recognize the people there. But it was clear that elections could not be held unless the election commission was ready. And I received no word from the chairman of the election commission prior to the 19th of September. And as soon as I received it, I communicated with my cabinet, and the letter said that elections could not be held by the commission before the end of February 2020. And I did exactly that. I ordered the election to be held the first working day after the end of February. So there's a lot of misunderstanding, but there was deliberate misinformation by people who tried to pretend that APNU was holding on to power and that we were responsible for prolongation of the so-called crisis. All of this was an invention of the PPP. All of this is part of the holiday effect that they successfully moved the process off of the legitimate agency, that is the Election Commission, and put it in a place which I don't think had the capability to run elections. That is my view. And I think that is a lesson we learned, that we must abide by the Constitution. And in future, there must be some means of providing some restraint to any movement, any elector trying to prevent the legitimate declaration of the results of one or more regions simply by going to the courts. I don't see that the courts, either the High Court, Appeal Court, well, Appeal Court has some power, or the Court of Justice, CCJ. I think that is an anomaly. If you read the Constitution, the court, the CCJ, the Appeal Court of Guyana, has that responsibility to ensure that the elections, any queries concerning the election should be settled, at least in Guyana, by the Appeal Court. It's quite clear, as far as I'm concerned, that the Appeal Court acted correctly when it said that in the Court of Appeal, that in the case that Esmond David brought against the Chief Election Officer, that they must only count valid votes. That is right. That's a correct decision. But this is a decision that the Election Commission should have taken on its own, to only count valid votes. So,
and certainly
there's a lot of misinformation, unfortunately. And to the extent
lots of
that
misinformation indeed, but we do intend to cover this on a subsequent program or programs. Sorry, President Granger, you were saying something?
No, I'm just saying that we learned a lot of lessons, not only how to do things properly, but how not to do things. And I hope that when people speak about constitutional reform and they speak about electoral reform, we iron out these anomalies that the Election Commission must be allowed to do its work.
All right. Without political interferences and manipulations and threats and so forth, or even some of them right there at GCOM should be doing their work. Final question. What was the impact of the PPP's Halidar effect on the general and regional elections? Some of which you spoke briefly, but in closing, some of those impacts.
Well, I would say that the impact was to derail the the electoral process. It disrupted, and you can see from that violence, it was disruptive, and I believe that the human beings felt fear, something that officials should not operate on the duress. They should not feel fear, but they felt fear. They feared for their lives with that sort of violence unleashed by the PPP. Certainly, I can tell you, the school children in the West Berbice, feared for their lives when they saw that sort of violence. Probably the first time they ever traveled in a civil school bus and be stoned and had to go to hospital. The Election Commission, I cannot speak with them, but the level of intimidation that was brought against them was bound to have an effect. And as I said openly, that as far as I'm concerned, the CEO's declaration of 11th of July should have been accepted. And that would have sorted matters out. They didn't have to go until August. And I'm sure there were a lot of voters who felt that they had been robbed of the legitimate outcome of their votes, and that when they read of the anomalies, it was clear that even though the Election Commission had ordered or agreed to the recount process by CARICOM, in fact, they could not count all of the boxes, and they only counted 18% of the boxes. So their conclusions could only be partially applicable, because they did not count all the boxes. They couldn't recount all of the boxes. They counted 18%, and they admit that. But even in that 18%, they found anomalies and inconsistencies and irregularities. And I believe the voters are quite in order to feel that those anomalies and inconsistencies were sufficient to overturn the elections. But as I said, we are a law-abiding country, and we work within the laws. We don't invade the Capitol building. We don't try to overturn the government. This happened in 2000 in the United States with the person
Al Gore,
who went with Al Gore and George Bush Jr. And in the final analysis, the court ruled. And I think there are many people, including with Al Gore, who felt that he should have won. But the court ruled, and that's how countries operate in the modern world. We obey the courts, we obey the Constitution.
All right. We have much more to talk about this here and in subsequent programs. But for now, I want to thank you again, President Granger, for your time. And thank you for explaining some things I'm sure are new for some folks. And you did say that right after the elections, you spoke out on the 2nd of August. I think you held a press conference. But for some reason or the other, some folks seem to think after the elections, you, as they say in Guyana, beat out.
It's not true. At every stage along the way, from the 2nd of March, there were public addresses. Certainly, every major ruling by the court, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Caribbean Court of Justice, I made clear broadcasts. They were recorded in writing, and they were recorded on film, on video. And I was never out of touch. But some people like to peddle this lie. And I think there are a lot of lies surrounding the entire electoral process. That I was invited to be sworn in and refused to be sworn. It's laughable. And that I walked away. But I made a broadcast explaining all my moves. And at every stage, I explained that I have obeyed the Constitution. At every stage, and the Constitution said the declaration would be made. And when the declaration was made, I had no option. I couldn't call on the GDF to overturn the government. We would have been in turmoil. So I behaved in a constitutional manner, correct manner, and I will ensure that in future, whatever experience I gain will be used to make Guyana a safe and happy place again through a partnership that goes out to the people and is responsive to the people, is representative of the people, and really respectful of the electorate. Respectful of the electorate. Gaining political office is not an entitlement, it's something that has to be earned. Gaining public trust is not an entitlement, it has to be earned. That is what we must learn.
Thank you so much, President David Otter Granger. Under the APNUAFC government, Guyana started to breathe again. Oh, what a mess you guys had to clean up from the PPP. What a mess. And still is. For 4 years they're in office. The mess is even worse with the billions of dollars of oil money. I just wish you guys had access to that. Hopefully you guys will have access to that after the next elections. Thank you so much for your time, President Granger. Please give our regards to the former First Lady, busy First Lady, doing good things for young people and good things for women and so forth. Good things. Give her my regards and our regards as well. Thank you so much, sir.
I'll do that. Thank you, and good night to you and your viewers.
Thank you again. And to all of our viewers, we'll see you guys same place, same time next week. We'll continue the discussion on the general and regional elections, what happened, and so forth. And most of your questions, if not all, are going to be answered. Have a good rest of the night, guys. So long.
Fisherman, they catch them a bring from a canoe boat, man, them start uploading. Aymara, Kwakwari, Gale Baka, Kuma, even Lokonani.